Alexander now set out from Phaselis, sending part of his army through the mountains towards Perge on the road built for him by the Thracians. The route would otherwise have been long and difficult. He himself led his own section along the coastal path by the seashore, which is only open to passage when the winds are blowing from the north. If south winds prevail, this shore route is impassable. The winds had been from the south, but now he had strong northerlies setting in, not without divine intervention, as Alexander and his men saw it, which gave him a quick and easy passage. As he marched on from Perge, envoys from Aspendus met him on the way, with full authority to surrender their city to him, but they asked him not to introduce a garrison. They left with their request about the garrison conceded. But Alexander required them to pay a 50 talent contribution to his army's wages and to hand over the horses which they bred as their tribute in kind to the king of Persia. They agreed about the money and the surrender of the horses before they left. Alexander proceeded towards Side. The inhabitants there are Cimmerians from Cyme in Aeolis. The story they tell of themselves is that when the first colonists sent out from Cyme put into land here and disembarked to make their settlement, they immediately lost all memory of the Greek tongue and spoke a foreign language from the start, but not that of the neighboring barbarians, rather a new and hitherto unknown dialect of their own. And from that time, the people of Side have continued to speak a barbarian language unique in the area. Leaving a garrison in Side, Alexander advanced against Cilium, a strong position with a garrison of foreign mercenaries as well as the local barbarians themselves. He was unable to take Cilium at one straightforward assault, and news had reached him on his march that the Aspendians were reneging all the terms of their agreement. They had refused to hand over the horses to those sent to collect them or to pay the money. They had brought their effects from the countryside into the city, had shut their gates against Alexander's emissaries, and were repairing the dilapidated parts of their walls. On this intelligence, Alexander marched for Aspendus. Most of Aspendus is built on a strong acropolis which rises sheer, with the river Eurymedon running right past it. They also had a good number of houses on the level round the acropolis, surrounded by a low wall. As soon as they learnt of Alexander's approach, the inhabitants abandoned this wall and the houses on the lower ground, thinking them impossible to defend, and all took refuge on the Acropolis. When Alexander arrived with his force, he crossed the deserted wall and then camped in the houses which the Aspendians had abandoned. When the Aspendians saw Alexander there in person, they had not expected this, and his army surrounding them on all sides, they sent envoys to request an accommodation on the previous terms. Alexander could see the defensive strength of the place and had not come equipped for a long siege, but even so, he refused to settle with them on the same terms. He demanded their leading men as hostages, the horses as previously agreed, and 100 talents in place of the original 50. They were to be subject to the satrap appointed by Alexander and to pay taxes every year to the Macedonians. There would be a judgment made on the territory they were accused of forcibly annexing from their neighbors. With all this conceded to his satisfaction, Alexander moved on to Perge, and from there set out for Phrygia. His route lay past the city of Telmissus. The people here are barbarians of the Pisidian race, and the place they inhabit is on high ground with cliffs on all sides and a difficult way past it. A mountain slopes down from the city to this road and ends there, but opposite another mountain rises no less sheer. These two mountains form effective gates to the road, so that a small guard force holding the mountains can block any passage. On this occasion, the Telmicians had brought out their entire force and were occupying both mountains. Seeing this, Alexander ordered the Macedonians to camp where they were. He reckoned that when they saw them making camp, the Telmicians would not stay there in full force, but most would return to the city, leaving just a guard on the mountains. His supposition proved correct. Most of them left and the guard detachments remained. He immediately led an attack on them, taking with him the archers, the javelin battalions, and the lighter armed hoplites. The guards did not hold out under fire and abandoned their position. Alexander then passed through the narrows and camped close by the city. Envoys now came to him from the people of Selga. They too are warlike barbarians of the Pisidian race, and theirs is a large city. They had long been enemies of the Telmicians, and so this embassy had come to offer Alexander friendship. He made a treaty with them, and from then on found them completely loyal. Alexander recognized the impossibility of any quick capture of Telmicis and set off for Sagalassus. This too was no small city, populated likewise by Pisidians, who were reputed to be the most warlike of this generally warlike race. They were waiting for him now, having occupied the hill in front of the city, which offered as strong a defensive position as the wall itself. Alexander drew up the Macedonian phalanx as follows. On the right wing, where he took up his own position, he had the foot guards, and next to them, he ranged the companion infantry all the way to the left wing, each brigade taking its position from that day's sequence set for the commanding officers. On the left, he gave the overall command to Amyntas, the son of Anabasis. Posted in front of the right wing were the archers and the Agrianians, and the Thracian javelin men commanded by Sitalces, in front of the left. The Pisidian defense was joined by reinforcements from Telmicis. Alexander's troops had begun their assault on the hill held by the Pisidians and were at the steepest part of the ascent when the barbarians launched group after group in attack on each wing, where the ground favored their line of attack and made it hardest for their enemies to advance uphill. They turned back the archers, less than fully armed as they were, and the first to engage. But the Agrianians stood firm, as the Macedonian phalanx was already coming up close behind, with Alexander in plain sight at its head. When the fighting turned hand to hand, it was unarmored barbarians against hoplites. The barbarians were everywhere, falling wounded, and finally gave way. Some 500 of them were killed, but few were taken alive. Lightly armed and with knowledge of the area, they could get away easily, whereas the Macedonians, weighed down by their armor and ignorant of the paths, had little enthusiasm for pursuit. Alexander, however, followed up hard behind the fugitives and stormed their city. Of his own men, he had lost Cleander, the commander of the archers, and about 20 others. He then went on to attack the rest of the Pisidians, taking some of their fortresses and winning the surrender of the others. From Pisidia, he passed into Phrygia by the lake called Ascania, where salt crystallizes naturally, and the locals make use of it without any need for salt from the sea. 4 days later, he reached Selene, where the Acropolis, rising steep on all sides, was held under the satrap of Phrygia by a garrison of 1,000 Carians and 100 Greek mercenaries. These sent envoys to Alexander, assuring him that they would surrender the position if reinforcements did not reach them by the date which had been agreed, and they specified the day. Alexander thought this a better proposition than a siege of the completely unassailable Acropolis. So he left 1,500 troops as a guard on Selene, stayed there 10 days himself, appointing Antigonus, the son of Philip, satrap of Phrygia, and replacing him as general in command of the allies were Balacrus, the son of Amyntas, and then set out for Gordium. He sent orders to Parmenion to bring his force and meet him there, and so he did. The newly married men who had been sent back to Macedonia also came to Gordium, and with them a fresh levy of troops under the command of Ptolemy the son of Seleucus, Coenus the son of Polymocrates, and Meleager the son of Neoptolemus. There were 3,000 Macedonian infantry, 300 cavalry, 200 Thessalian cavalry, and 150 Eleans, led by Alcaeus of Elis. Gordium is in Hellespontine Phrygia, located on the river Sangarius. The source of the Sangarius is in Phrygia, and the river flows through the territory of the Bithynian Thracians, to issue into the Black Sea. Here, there also arrived an embassy from Athens to meet Alexander. Their request was for the release of the Athenian prisoners who were captured at the river Granicus fighting on the Persian side and were now among the 2,000 captives imprisoned in Macedonia. They left with no success for the time being in their appeal for the prisoners. In the middle of the war against Persia, Alexander thought it dangerous to make any relaxation in the threat to the Greeks, who were prepared to fight against Greece for the barbarians. But his answer was that they should come again with the same request when conditions were favorable.